Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at the shifting sands in northern Syria with the possibility of an unbroken strip that would stretch all the way across to Iraq, controlled by Kurdish forces, and it's got Turkey on tenterhooks. With us to talk about it from Istanbul, Galip Dalai, research director at the Al-Shaq Forum. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Idris Nassan, former spokesperson for the Kurdish-led local government there. He is in Kobani, and also with us, former UN General Dominique Trinquant, and France 24 International Affairs Chief Editor Robert Parsons. If Kurdistan was a unified country, it would have 35 million citizens and would span 5 different nations. We can call those up for you on a map, and you can see on the map that it would stretch there all the way into Armenia, to parts of Iran, and on the other side, of course, into Turkey and Syria through Iraq. Rob Parsons, we're going to zoom in on the areas where the Syrian Kurds now control territory. And you can, here, I'm going to get up here and we're going to look at it. You can notice that over here is this gap between Jarablus, where we were talking about earlier, and Manbij. Tell us a bit about that area.
Well, not Jarablus, in fact, François. In the corner there, you've got an area in the yellow, which is controlled by the YPG, the Kurdish militia. Jarablus is on the border, which is threatened by the SDF, the joint force of Arabs and Kurds, which have just taken control of Manbij. The fear in Turkey is that if the Kurds and the Arabs together take control of Jarablus, that they'll be able to join up those 2 bits of yellow to make a contiguous area all the way along the border, almost to the Mediterranean Sea, across to Iraq, all along the Turkish border. And the last thing that the Turks want at the moment is for that to happen, because the relationship between the YPG and the PKK, the force fighting the Turkish government, is, to put it at least, extremely strong.
All right, and in northeastern Syria is this city where we saw a week ago this shooting happen between Syrian government forces and the Kurds, who'd been giving each other a wide berth pretty much up until now. That's in northeastern Syria. That certainly has changed the equation. We now have word of a truce there that's been installed. Explain to us that relationship between the Kurds there in northeastern Syria and the government in Damascus.
Well, there's always been a tense relationship between the Kurds in the north of the country and the Syrian government. Over the last couple of years or so, the Syrian government has been ready to let them be whilst they concentrated on fighting against the Syrian rebels and to a smaller degree against the Islamic State organization. During that period, the YPG, the Syrian Kurds, have consolidated their position to such a degree in the north of the country that the Syrian government is now becoming concerned at the possibility of them breaking away and forming a separate state. The Syrian Kurds say they don't want that, they want autonomy. But the two have come begun to clash with each other in the town of hatchet over the last week. The deal that appears to be struck today is very much in the favor of the Syrian Kurds, who have all but forced the Syrian army out of the town.
Idris Nassan, what do the Syrian Kurds want? Do they want an autonomy akin to the one that the Iraqi Kurds have?
No, actually, in Syria, in North Syria, and in Iraq, there are 2 different groups of Kurds. Actually, they are against each other sometimes. Sometimes they are good, with each other, but they have different ideologies. Actually, for this, we cannot say that now Kurds are fighting to connect Iraqi Kurdistan to north of Syria. But what's going on in North Syria is that the Kurds, alongside with the other components like Arabs, Turkmen, Assyrians, and others, they are fighting for federalism because they do believe that the federalism is the best solution for the Syrian crisis, which is in the 6th year now. Now, when we
so Idris, just explain to us, what does federalism mean? In the case of Iraq, we know what it means. I mean, it's virtually an independent state right now in Erbil, the capital of Iraqi Kurdistan. Is that something that Syrian Kurds want for themselves?
Actually, it is different a little bit, not like the federalism in Kurdistan, but it is a kind of federalism that is suitable for the north of Syria, because in north of Syria we have, like I mentioned, different ethnic groups and Kurds and others. So we cannot say that it's a Kurdish federalism. We cannot call it Kurdistan of Syria or something like this. We just call it the federalism of North Syria because of these different components. For this, now we have some autonomous administrations in the 3 cantons, in Afrin, in Kobani, and in Jazeera. Now already from Jazeera, from the Iraqi borders to Kobani, which is on the eastern bank of the Euphrates River, they are connected to each other after liberation of Tel Abyad. But the fighting now through Manbij to Al-Bab, then to Afrin. This is now what the Syrian Democratic Forces are doing to complete this federalism and to declare it actually in the coming maybe days or weeks. They are preparing for this. But what I want to say, what I want to tell you that this federalism is not just for Kurds actually. Now the different ethnic groups are working for this federalism, and they are actually sharing within the institutions of these autonomous administrations and, of course, the federalism too.
Galib Dalai, is this concept of federalism for Syria a good idea?
Well, I think like in the end, the Syria, what we see down the road, decentralization is going to be inevitable. But the question is how you go for decentralization. Should it be based on like sectarian or ethnic identities, or should it be based on administrative units? In my own calculation or in my own judgment, I think it will be better if we go through the administrative units in which, like, you know, the administrative unit that can economically or socially or security-wise that can function better can form, like, you know, these administrative units. Because one of the trouble that we face in the larger Middle East, not just within the context of Syria, is whenever we face a problem with the larger nation states, the easy or the quick fix that we go for is let's go for the identity subunits or identity, let's say, statelets. And that creates, like, you know, a vicious cycle that in the end, it creates a cycle that can, you know, start the atomization of the Middle East. But what I think, like, you know, the trouble, the root cause of the ills of the Middle East is not that the identity maps and the administrative maps does not correspond to each other. It is the bad politics. So if you can put good politics within a good administrative unit, definitely different ethnic and sectarian identities can live together. And even, like, you know, when we focus too much on the ethnic identities, we don't focus on the differences within each group. For instance, like, you know, when we talk about the Syrian Kurds, here we only talk about the PYD. But let's not forget, PYD is a group, one of the groups among, like, many other groups within the Syrian Kurdish scene. And there are, like, you know, many other Kurdish groups, like the Democratic Party of Syrian Kurdistan is one of them. There are another Kurdish groups, and some of them are very much critical of the action of the PYD, and they find it, like, quite undemocratic. And actually, PYD has engaged in repelling some of the decent Kurdish voices, whether the Kurdish intellectuals or the politicians from the Rojava. So
okay, so it's impossible. You're saying it's impossible to carve up the Middle East according to ethnic and identity lines. It would just be too much of a quagmire if you tried it. In that context, how do you feel about the visit to Istanbul this Tuesday of the president of Iraqi Kurdistan? What does he bring? What do you make of the model there?
Well, I think, like, you know, I mean, when you look at which countries or which groups with whom the Turkey enjoys the best relation, is one of them the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq and the Qatar and etc. That shows that Turkey can perfectly actually live by a federal Kurdish entity. Okay, it is true that Turkey has created some very unnecessary steps before the Kurdish entity came into being in Iraq. But Iraq was also a different story because the Kurdish unit in Iraq does not have a wing within the Turkey. When we talk about the Syrian Kurdistan, the Kurdish part of Syria, we are not talking about the Kurdish part of Syria. We are also talking about the Turkish Kurdish question. We are also talking about the PKK. And I think if there was, if the peace process continued, if the settlement process continued, Turkey would have adopted a different stance vis-a-vis the PYD in Syria. But when it derailed, given the organic links between the PKK and PYD, given that they have the same leader, the same ideology, very much also the same organizational structure, Turkey cannot treat as if PYD is a different story while it engaged in a bloody fight with PKK.
General Tankon, your take on this visit by President Massoud to Ankara?
Yeah, I just want to come back to the fact that we are talking about politics, and this country has been fighting at war for 6 years. And don't forget that the people who have been fighting and the people who are the winner will be around the table. And when they are the winner, they will have more weight than the others. So when you say that, for example, YPG is difficult to talk to, fine. But they are very powerful on the ground. They've been winning in Manbij, they've been winning in Kobane, and so you've got to talk to these people. And afterwards to say, so the federation will be like that and like that because I don't want this federation to be ethnic, fine. So you've got to find a solution with the people who are powerful because they've got the weapons, they've been fighting for 6 years, and they are the winners around the table. So I think you can't disconnect this very nice political thinking and the fact that the people has been fighting for 6 years.
Is it really all jockeying, Robert Parsons, ahead of an eventual Geneva peace conference that works? Or is this all-out war to the bitter end?
Well, no, there's a great deal of jockeying involved there. We were just talking in the first half of our debate about the role of the Russians, the Turkish government, the Americans, what's going on, and the importance of the talks in Geneva. It's very interesting that up until now, the Russians have been supporting the participation of the Kurds in the Geneva process. The Turks have been extremely opposed to it, and up until now, the Kurds haven't participated. Will the Russians change their tune now and start going quiet on Kurdish participation? The YPG or PYD have representation. They have an office that they opened not very long ago in Moscow because of the close relationships between Moscow and the Kurds. It will be interesting to see whether the Russians use the influence they have with the Kurds to bring the Turks and the Kurds closer together. Because as Dominic was saying, the reality on the ground is that the Kurds are there and they're the most active, successful player in that part of Syria. It's the Kurds on the ground who have been pushing back the Islamic State organization. The Americans are backing them. And the Americans may come round to the position that if there's no possibility of getting a future Syria other than one that is completely controlled by Assad or one that's controlled by the Islamic State or al-Nusra, perhaps a breakup of Syria into 3 parts, in which one part in the north is controlled by the Kurds and their allies, as our guest from Kobani was suggesting, not just Kurds, but also Arabs, Assyrians, Turkmens, and so on. That may be a possibility that Washington's beginning to consider now.
Idris Nassan, that brings us to the $64 question. What are you expecting, both from Russia, as spelled out there by Robert Parsons, and also from U.S. Vice President Joe Biden when he visits Ankara on Wednesday?
Yeah, actually, what we expect from the both main powers, international main powers, America and Russia, that they are already actually supporting the fighters on the ground. The Syrian Democratic Forces against ISIS, against the terrorism in general. With this supporting, they are actually making very important victory against the terrorism, and now they are pushing them from many places, from many towns now. now. The last one was Manbij, which is one of the most important and strategic towns under control of ISIS in Syria. What we expect that they have to continue with supporting these forces on the ground if they really want to end ISIS and replace the actions of ISIS with something democratic, something that is suitable for all components of these regions. Just push some extreme groups to replace ISIS in Jarablus, in Azaz, in the strip, the border strip from Jarablus to Azaz, I think will not different anything on the ground, just will make a lot of troubles in the coming days, and fierce fighting is going to continue, because now we have the extreme groups of Asifat al-Shamal, which is backed by Turkey, and we have on the other ground Jarablus military council, which is backed by the Syrian Democratic Forces and backed by the US-led coalition. The solution is not to push these groups inside Manbij, inside Jarablus, and to continue with controlling of Manbij after that as a part of the plan, of the Turkish plan, and then to Tabqa, and then to Raqqa, to cut the way of the Syrian Democratic Forces to not reach to Afrin. The solution must be how to end these terrorists on the ground. I mean ISIS first of all, and then to make a solution for all Syrian people.
But do you share the possibility, the prospect that Robert Parsons just raised, that he talked about Russia perhaps going quiet over its support for the YPG, and perhaps the U.S. in the interest of after all, smoothing things over with their NATO partner Turkey, also perhaps lessening their support for the Syrian Kurds?
No, actually, what I believe in that these main forces, international main forces, they know very well that when they give up Kurds, not Kurds actually, let's say the Syrian Democratic Forces on the ground, it means that ISIS is going to succeed again. Now, when they stop actually supporting these forces, we see how ISIS attack on civilians in some towns, in some villages. What I believe that I believe in that they have to go on with supporting these forces on the ground. They have to focus on fighting against terrorism. The big problem in Syria is now the terrorism that some agendas, let's say some regional, some international agendas that use them against the Syrian people just for them to gain their goals, their interests inside Syria. They don't care about the Syrian people. They don't care about how we suffer from ISIS, the beheading of children, the raping of women, and the burning of properties and houses. This is what they don't care about all these things. They just talk about we are going to push ISIS from the borders of Turkey. So now ISIS is controlling this border for 3 years now. Why they haven't made these actions before? Why now? With the stepping of federalism and going of the Syrian Democratic Forces more in the western side of Euphrates River. Why before they didn't get rid of ISIS? This is the question for the international, main powers, and of course to Turkey too.
Galip Dalai, again, I hark back to that horrific bombing that happened over the weekend in Gaziantep at that wedding party with at least 54 killed. Is that going to change the equation? To what degree is that going to change policy for Turkey's government?
Well, I mean, this is not the first attack that ISIS has conducted in Turkey. And actually, right now, the ISIS attack in Turkey has went being from sporadic to a systematic one. I mean, the Gaziantep, the Atatürk Airport, Istanbul, Suruç, Diyarbakır. So it is the, it is the continuation of many other attacks that we have witnessed in Turkey. The Turkish policy on ISIS, has been quite. Turkey has been significantly cracking down on the ISIS infrastructure in Turkey. Turkey has increased extra security measures on its border, but we should not forget this is 910-kilometer borders, and it's not very easy to basically control every single bit of it. And it is the same border that the PKK also uses very easily, given the fact that Turkey is very much engaged in the fight with PKK. I think no one will claim that Turkey is turning a blind eye to PKK using this border, going, coming and going out very easily. And also, just because there is some cross-border activities, that doesn't mean like, you know, well, one country is supporting the ISIS. If you go the same with the same very superficial logic, one can perfectly say, well, the France, Belgium, Germany, and Britain is supporting the ISIS because a very significant number of the ISIS members are coming from the Europe, are passing through the European airports, are like, you know, passing through the European borders and arriving to Turkey and then to the Syria.
So let me get General Tanko on this. Your reaction?
I mean, the aim is really to close the border, the Turkish border, and the key to that is that for people who are fighting IS, whoever will close the border will be fine, and the Kurdish are able to do that. So that's probably one point. The second point is that suddenly the Turkish,
I misunderstood. Does he suggest closing the whole border?
Which is fine, but it's a bit late because for years all the traffic across the border, it was right saying that a lot of the people were coming from Europe in Syria, but they were coming through Turkey.
You're not talking about closing the border. You're talking about stopping IS getting through.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, sorry.
All right, and just very briefly, Galip, because we're almost out of time, what are you expecting from that visit by U.S. Vice President Joe Biden to Ankara?
Well, I mean, two topics will be on the agenda. One of them is the extradition of the Fethullah Gülen, who is basically the mastermind behind the recent coup attempt, and the second one will be Syria. So, do I expect a big breakthrough? No, I don't expect a big breakthrough because the American and the Turkish position on both issues is quite wide apart from each other. But what I expect, probably there will be something, there will be, you know, some areas that the both partners can agree upon or can cooperate upon. But nevertheless, I don't expect any big breakthrough coming from this relationship, coming from this meeting. It will be more as a damage control as a result of the lack of support that Turkey has experienced after the coup from the West, from US and Europe, because like still we haven't had any significant visit from any Western leaders. So it will be more of an gesture of goodwill rather than any meaningful problem-solving meeting.
Galip Delay, many thanks for joining us from Istanbul. I want to thank Idris Nassan for being with us from Kobani, Syria, General Dominique Trinquant, and France 24's very own Robert Parsons. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon. One thing you can be sure of is Joe Biden is not a man to be soft-spoken.
Well, Recep Erdogan isn't either, so I think it'll be an interesting tete-a-tete. Let's take a look at some of the, I suppose, predictions ahead of Joe Biden's visit to Ankara tomorrow. The New York Times is pointing to the very unusual unity that has emerged in a usually deeply polarized country after the failed coup. Seylan Yayingzu describing scenes at a fete, I suppose, that took place along the Bosphorus after, where all families that would usually be divided all came together, everybody opposing this idea of an outside coup. So a lot of unity against that coup, you could say, in Turkey. TRT World, the Turkish state broadcaster, US delegation in Turkey to discuss Gulen extradition. So really this is front and center of the Turkish agenda. This is what they're focusing on. What will Biden say? What can he potentially promise on this particular issue? Joe Biden himself tweeting, "This week I'll travel to Ankara to underscore America's solidarity with the Turkish people in the wake of tragic events and the coup attempt." For the Associated Press, the US is working to keep Turkey in its fold as the NATO ally looks east. The US is struggling to preserve its wobbly partnership with Turkey as it entertains a closer relationship with Russia.
On that point, General Trinquant, could we see a situation where the Incirlik Air Base, which is so key for Western airstrikes, could be off limits to the US but used by Russia?
It will not be the first time.
Well, if I could just come on in that, the Turks said today, Deputy Prime Minister said it's not possible. Turkey is a member of NATO, Russia is not. There's no way that Russia will be able to use that airbase.
And of course, the other big issue will be Mr. Gulen and the extradition. And for Deutsche Welle, the German state broadcaster, they have spoken to a former US ambassador to Turkey, James Jeffries. He says, look, this is a legal decision. It's not something that the Obama administration itself can just decide like that. The administration has to present the Turkish case, and the judiciary decides. Looking at Sputnik News, Russian media, they don't seem to be convinced by this legal idea, or I suppose the fact that it will be a legal decision. They're saying, no, he's a bargaining chip. The US won't extradite Gulen until he has served his purpose. That's the point of view of a political scientist in Ankara, Ilan Uzgel, who says Gulen is a trump card in Washington's hand. Meanwhile, the Washington Post says that Joe Biden needs to give Turkey's Erdogan some tough advice, and they're talking about the post-coup purges. This is a statistic I hadn't seen before. 38,000 prisoners have been released in Turkey to open up cells for the newly arrested 38,000 prisoners, and over 40,000 of people have been detained, being, I suppose, suspected of being involved in or supporting the coup. Mr. Biden ought to candidly tell his hosts that the US did not instigate the coup and that it will not relinquish Mr. Gulen to a witch hunt, says the Washington Post editorial board. Bloomberg also seeming to think that Mr. Biden should raise his finger and wag it somewhat at
but in private.
Erdogan. Well, in private, it seems to have happened in perhaps a slightly untruthful photo moment capture. Anyway, I don't think he should do that. I think Recep wouldn't take it well.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creed. And I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.